In 1893, Chicago stood at the center of the world's attention. The city hosted the World's Columbian Exposition, a spectacular celebration of progress, innovation, and American achievement commemorating the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Over 6 months, 27 million people passed through the fairgrounds, marveling at the gleaming white city with its neoclassical architecture, electric lights, and technological wonders, including the world's first Ferris wheel. Chicago itself had transformed dramatically in the 2 decades since the Great Fire of 1871 had destroyed much of the city. Rebuilt with ambition and speed, it had become America's second-largest metropolis, a booming industrial center where fortunes could be made and identities could be reinvented. The city attracted thousands of young people seeking opportunity, drawn by jobs, excitement, and the promise of a better life. Women, particularly, arrived from small towns across America and Europe, many traveling alone for the first time in their lives, seeking independence and employment in the rapidly expanding urban economy. But Chicago's explosive growth came with chaos. Building regulations were minimal and poorly enforced. Police resources were stretched thin. Communication between cities remained slow, making it easy for criminals to move, change names, and disappear into the urban masses. The Gilded Age, for all its gleaming progress, was also an era of exploitation, fraud, and violence hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. Into this perfect storm of opportunity and anonymity stepped a man who would become known as America's first documented serial killer. He was intelligent, charming, and educated, a practicing physician with impeccable manners and a warm smile. He built a hotel specifically designed to trap, torture, and kill his guests, and for years no one suspected that the friendly Dr. H. Holmes was operating what would later be called the Murder Castle. This is the story of Herman Webster Mudgett, the man who wore the mask of Dr. Holmes, and the architectural nightmare he created in the shadow of Chicago's greatest celebration. In the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago, at the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets, stood a 3-story building that appeared unremarkable from the outside. The ground floor housed a pharmacy operated by Dr. H. Holmes, a physician who was known throughout the neighborhood for his courtesy and professionalism. The second floor contained rooms available for rent at reasonable prices, advertised as suitable accommodation for single women working in the city or visiting for the World's Fair. The third floor served as Dr. Holmes's private residence and office. To passers-by, it was simply another commercial building in a rapidly developing neighborhood. Inside, the building was something else entirely. The second floor concealed a labyrinth of windowless rooms, doors that locked only from the outside, staircases that led nowhere, and hallways that ended at brick walls. Secret chutes connected certain rooms directly to the basement. Gas pipes ran through the walls, controlled by valves in Holmes's private chambers. Several rooms were soundproofed and airtight, transformable into gas chambers at the turn of a valve. The basement contained a dissection table, a crematorium large enough to accommodate a human body, vats of acid, and bins of quicklime. Surgical instruments, saws, and knives hung on the walls. Articulated human skeletons stood in corners, ready for sale to medical schools. This was the Murder Castle, though no one called it that until after the horror was discovered. For 3 years, from 1891 to 1994, Herman Webster Mudgett, who called himself Dr. H. Holmes, used this building to lure, trap, torture, and kill dozens of people, most of them young women who had come to Chicago seeking opportunity and found only death.
He confessed to 27 murders. Police believed the true number might exceed 200. Many victims were never identified. Their names are lost to history, their disappearances noticed by no one, and their bodies destroyed in the basement of a building designed specifically for murder. Herman Webster Mudgett was born on May 16, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, the son of an alcoholic and violent father. He displayed intelligence from an early age, but also a disturbing lack of empathy and a fascination with manipulation. An often repeated story from his childhood claims that at age 11, schoolyard bullies forced him to touch a human skeleton in a doctor's office, intending to frighten him. Instead of trauma, young Herman experienced fascination. He began studying anatomy on his own, seeking out medical texts and spending hours contemplating the mechanics of the human body. He enrolled at the University of Vermont, then transferred to the University of Michigan Medical School, from which he graduated in 1884. During his medical training, Mudgett engaged in insurance fraud, stealing cadavers from the medical school, disfiguring them to make identification difficult, and then claiming they were accident victims for whom he held insurance policies. He collected the insurance money and moved on before authorities could investigate thoroughly. He married 3 times, always bigamously, never bothering to divorce his previous wives. His first wife, Clara Lovering, whom he married in 1778 when he was just 17, he simply abandoned. His second wife, Mirtha Belknap, married him in 1887, not knowing he was still married to Clara. His third wife, Georgiana Yoke, married him in 1994 without knowledge of the other 2 marriages. Remarkably, Holmes never killed any of his wives, apparently keeping his domestic life separate from his criminal activities. In 1886, Mudgett moved to Chicago and adopted the name Henry Howard Holmes, styling himself as Dr. H. H. Holmes. He found employment as a pharmacist in Englewood, working for an elderly widow named Mrs. Holton at the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets. Within months, Mrs. Holton disappeared. Holmes told neighbors she had moved to California. He took over the pharmacy and made it profitable. Mrs. Holton was almost certainly his first Chicago victim.
In 1887, Holmes purchased a lot directly across the street from the pharmacy and began construction of what would become the Murder Castle. The building project continued until 1891, during which time Holmes exhibited behavior that seemed eccentric but not necessarily criminal. He hired and fired construction crews constantly, ensuring that no single contractor ever saw the complete architectural plans. He would employ workers for a few weeks, then dismiss them without payment, claiming financial difficulties or dissatisfaction with their work. Most simply moved on to other jobs rather than pursue legal action for unpaid wages. This tactic meant that no one understood the building's true purpose or layout. The completed structure was 3 stories tall. The first floor maintained a legitimate appearance. Holmes's pharmacy occupied one storefront, and he rented other commercial spaces to generate income and maintain respectability. The third floor contained Holmes's personal apartment and office, along with separate rooms where he kept his various wives and mistresses isolated from one another. The second floor, however, was pure nightmare-made architecture. Holmes had designed and built a killing floor containing over 60 rooms, many without windows or ventilation. Hallways twisted and turned, leading nowhere. Doors opened to brick walls. Staircases climbed to ceilings with no exit. Certain rooms could be locked only from the outside, trapping anyone inside. Holmes had installed peepholes, allowing him to observe occupants from hidden passages. Several rooms were airtight and connected to gas lines that Holmes controlled from his private chambers. He could flood these rooms with asphyxiating gas while watching his victims suffocate through the peepholes.
Chutes ran from various second-floor rooms directly to the basement, allowing bodies to be disposed of quickly and quietly. The basement itself was the castle's true heart of horror, a fully equipped torture chamber and body disposal facility. Holmes had installed a crematorium furnace large enough to burn human remains, vats filled with acid for dissolving flesh, and bins of quicklime for accelerating decomposition. A dissection table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by surgical instruments, bone saws, and preserved organs in glass jars.
Holmes's method of operation was systematic and calculating. He specifically targeted young women who were new to Chicago, without local family or friends who might notice their disappearance. Many of his victims were employees he hired to work in his pharmacy or as secretaries in his office. Others responded to advertisements he placed in newspapers offering affordable rooms for rent. Holmes was extraordinarily charming. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, and possessed impeccable manners. He maintained his dark hair and neat mustache carefully. He exuded respectability and trustworthiness. Women felt safe with Dr. Holmes. The typical pattern began with Holmes offering employment and lodging. He would suggest that the young woman cut ties with her family temporarily, telling them she was starting fresh in the big city and would write once she was settled. He often persuaded victims to take out life insurance policies with him listed as beneficiary. Gradually, he isolated them from any outside connections. Once a victim was completely under his control, dependent on him for lodging and income, with no one expecting to hear from her, Holmes struck. His preferred method was asphyxiation by gas. He would trap a woman in one of the airtight rooms, then flood it with illuminating gas from pipes running through the walls. Through his peepholes, he could watch as she suffocated. Other methods included poisoning, strangulation, and in some cases prolonged torture in the basement. After death came the disposal process, which Holmes had turned into a profitable business. He dissected bodies on the basement table, removing skin, organs, and muscle tissue. He articulated the skeletons carefully, cleaning and preparing them for sale to medical schools and private collectors who paid anywhere from $25 to $200 for quality anatomical specimens. The remaining soft tissue was burned in the crematorium or dissolved in acid. Some bodies were buried in quicklime pits. Holmes ensured that nothing remained to identify his victims. They simply disappeared, becoming anonymous casualties of a rapidly growing city where people vanished every day. While the true number of Holmes' victims may never be known, several women can definitively be identified as his victims. Julia Smythe Connor, the wife of one of Holmes's employees, became his mistress. Her husband, Ned Connor, worked as a jeweler in Holmes' building and gradually realized the affair was occurring. When Ned confronted Holmes, Julia and her 8-year-old daughter Pearl disappeared. Holmes claimed they had moved to Iowa. Years later, police found 2 skeletons in the castle basement, identified as Julia and Pearl Connor. Emmeline Sigrand, 24 years old and considered beautiful by contemporary accounts, worked as Holmes's secretary. He promised her to marry her. She disappeared in December 1992, and her body was later discovered in one of the basement acid tanks. Minnie Williams was a wealthy heiress from Texas whom Holmes seduced specifically to gain access to her substantial inheritance. Once he had transferred her assets into his control, he convinced Minnie to bring her sister Anna to Chicago. Both sisters disappeared. Their bodies were never found, though Holmes later confessed to killing them. The Peitzel family suffered the most devastating losses. Benjamin Peitzel was Holmes's partner in various insurance fraud schemes.
In 1894, Holmes murdered Benjamin in Philadelphia as part of an elaborate insurance fraud. Then, shockingly, Holmes killed 3 of Benjamin's children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard Peitzel. He had convinced Benjamin's widow to let him take the children while she was grieving, claiming he was protecting them. Instead, he murdered them separately in different cities. These child murders, when discovered, would prove to be Holmes' downfall. Beyond these confirmed victims, dozens of young women worked for Holmes briefly before vanishing. Employees at the pharmacy, secretaries, housekeepers, they would appear for a few weeks, then disappear, explained away by Holmes as having quit or moved away. During the World's Fair especially, women renting rooms in the castle for the event's duration simply never left. No one searched for them. They became ghosts in Chicago's records, if they appeared in any records at all.
Holmes's empire of murder ended not because police suspected his building held dark secrets, but because he made a crucial mistake in Philadelphia. In 1894, Holmes murdered his partner Benjamin Peitzel as part of an insurance fraud scheme, then killed 3 of Peitzel's children to eliminate witnesses. The insurance company, suspicious of the claim, hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to investigate. Detective Frank Geyer took the case and began tracking Holmes's movements. Geyer was methodical and persistent. He followed Holmes's trail across multiple states, eventually discovering the bodies of Alice and Nellie Peitzel in a basement in Toronto, Canada, and Howard Peitzel buried in a chimney in Indianapolis. Holmes was arrested in Boston in November 1894 on charges of insurance fraud and murder. As the investigation into Holmes expanded, Chicago authorities shared information with Philadelphia police. In July 1895, Chicago detectives obtained a warrant to search the building at 63rd and Wallace. What they found inside shocked even hardened investigators. The second floor's bizarre architecture immediately raised suspicions. The doors to nowhere, the staircases ending at ceilings, the soundproof rooms with gas connections. But the basement revealed the full horror. Police discovered human bones throughout the space, along with female clothing and jewelry. The crematorium contained ash residue, later determined to contain human remains. The acid vats held partially dissolved tissue. Glass jars preserved organs lined shelves. Blood-stained surgical instruments lay on the dissection table. The quicklime pits held decomposed remains. Investigators found evidence of at least a dozen victims, though the condition of the remains made exact identification impossible. Holmes had been extraordinarily thorough in destroying evidence, but he had not been perfect. Neighbors came forward with stories of strange smells emanating from the building, of women seen entering but never leaving, of nighttime activity in the basement. The building was immediately dubbed the Murder Castle by newspapers, and the story spread nationally, creating a media sensation. From his jail cell, Holmes wrote a confession that was published in the Philadelphia Inquirer. He claimed responsibility for 27 murders, providing details about his victims and methods. However, Holmes was a compulsive liar, and his confession contained numerous fabrications and contradictions. He claimed to have killed people who were demonstrably still alive. He described methods that were physically impossible. He changed his story repeatedly, seemingly enjoying the attention and the power of keeping investigators uncertain about what was truth and what was fiction. Despite the evidence found in the murder castle, Holmes was tried only for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel, as Pennsylvania law allowed for a quicker path to conviction in that case. The trial began on October 28, 1895, in Philadelphia. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Holmes' guilt in Peitzel's death, including testimony from accomplices, physical evidence, and Holmes' own contradictory statements. The defense attempted to argue that Peitzel's death was suicide as originally claimed, but the evidence was irrefutable. On November 2, 1895, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Holmes was sentenced to death by hanging. While awaiting execution, Holmes gave several interviews to newspapers, alternately confessing to crimes and denying everything. He expressed no remorse. In some interviews, he claimed he had been possessed by Satan. In others, he insisted he was innocent of all charges and the victim of circumstance and coincidence. His final statement before execution acknowledged only the Peitzel murder, denying all others. On May 7, 1896, at Moyaminsing Prison in Philadelphia, Holmes was hanged. The execution did not go smoothly. The drop failed to break his neck immediately, and he died slowly from strangulation over approximately 15 minutes. His final request was that his body be buried in cement to prevent anyone from stealing it for medical examination or display. His coffin was placed in a grave 10 feet deep and filled with cement before being covered with earth.
The Murder Castle at 63rd and Wallace became a morbid tourist attraction after Holmes' arrest, with curious Chicagoans paying admission to tour the building's horrific architecture. However, on August 19, 1895, before Holmes's trial had even concluded, a mysterious fire broke out in the castle. The building was severely damaged, and many believed Holmes had arranged the arson to destroy remaining evidence. The structure stood in ruins for decades, a burned-out shell that neighborhood children were warned to avoid. Finally, in 1938, the United States Postal Service purchased the property, demolished what remained of the building, and constructed a post office on the site. Today, nothing marks the location. A modern postal facility occupies the lot where the Murder Castle once stood. No plaque commemorates the victims. The exact number of people Holmes killed remains unknown and unknowable. He confessed to 27 murders, but this number is almost certainly low. During the 6 months of the World's Fair in 1893, when Chicago was flooded with visitors and the city's infrastructure was overwhelmed, Holmes had optimal conditions for his crimes. Young women renting rooms for short periods with no local connections could disappear without anyone filing a missing persons report. Estimates based on the volume of human remains found in the castle's basement, the capacity of his killing rooms, and the timeline of his operation range from 50 to 200 victims. The truth died with Holmes. What is certain is that H. Holmes represents a particular kind of American horror, the charming predator who weaponized progress, used the chaos of rapid urbanization to his advantage, and turned architecture itself into a murder weapon. The Murder Castle was not just a place where killings occurred, it was a machine designed for killing. Every room and corridor conceived with death in mind.
H. Holmes has been called America's first serial killer, though this is not technically accurate. There were earlier serial murderers in American history. What makes Holmes unique is the scale, sophistication, and premeditation of his crimes. He did not kill in moments of passion or rage. He designed and constructed an entire building specifically for the purpose of murdering people efficiently and disposing of their bodies without detection. He turned murder into a business model, profiting from his victims by selling their remains to medical schools. The Holmes case had lasting impacts on American criminal justice and culture.
It demonstrated the need for better communication between police departments in different cities, leading to improved information sharing. It raised awareness about the particular vulnerability of young women living alone in cities, though this awareness often manifested as restrictions on women's independence rather than increased protections. The case inspired countless works of fiction, from novels to films to television series. The architecture of the murder castle has influenced horror fiction for over a century, appearing in various forms in stories about haunted houses and buildings designed with malevolent intent. The 2003 best-selling book, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, brought the Holmes story to a new generation, interweaving the narrative of the World's Fair with Holmes's murders and introducing millions of readers to the horror that lurked in Chicago during that celebration of progress. The victims of H. Holmes, most of them young women whose names we will never know, deserve to be remembered not just as statistics in a sensational case, but as real people with real lives that were stolen from them. They came to Chicago seeking opportunity, independence, and a better future. They found instead a predator who saw them as nothing more than raw material for profit. Could modern forensic science determine the true number of Holmes's victims if the murder castle still existed? How many young women disappeared into that building during the chaos of the World's Fair, never to be missed or mourned? What drives someone to design and build a structure specifically for killing, to turn architecture itself into a weapon? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're fascinated by the dark side of American progress, the predators who exploited the chaos of the Gilded Age, and the victims whose stories deserve remembrance, subscribe to Fog-Bound Mysteries. We explore real crimes from history's darkest corners, from Victorian London to Gilded Age Chicago, from George and Edinburgh to Jazz Age New Orleans. These are the murders that shocked nations, the killers who embodied their era's worst fears, and the victims who deserve to be honored with truth. Every case is meticulously researched and told with dignity, accuracy, and respect for those who suffered. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And until next time, remember the victims, question the past, and join us in the shadows of history. Thank you for watching.